Welcome, Notre Dame fans, to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Even if we are a little late, I mean, it happens. It happens. Technology is great when it works, okay?
Yes.
Let's just put it that way.
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
But I just got back in town, and so what better way to celebrate than have a podcast about everything that's going on? As I was sitting
there's a lot.
as I was sitting in my hotel room trying to focus on baseball, all I kept doing was going back to the board and getting updates from Brian about everything that was going on because Notre Dame doesn't sleep, okay? There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on.
I was told we're not going to have any new hires today.
Well,
I asked, I said, hey, can I go take care of my sick wife and make lunch and stuff now, or do you guys got something else planned? So
seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
But yes, so Notre Dame has moved in the direction of hiring, and that's what we're going to talk about. We've got a couple of different spots obviously to talk about, Brian, and we want to make sure that we hit everything, but we're going to start off with the departure of Lance Taylor.
Yes.
And our thoughts on that and what it meant and how it all went down and all of the fun stuff that you guys get here at Irish Breakdown. But that's where we're going to lead off with Lance Taylor, Brian, and go.
So obviously Lance Taylor got a promotion. He was hired, according to Pete Thamel from ESPN, he was hired to be the new offensive coordinator at Louisville. I think this is a good thing. I think this is a good thing in a lot of ways. Number one, when your running backs coach, because running back coaches don't get promoted to offensive coordinator very often. And so when a running backs coach at a program like Notre Dame, who didn't even run the ball that well this year, gets promoted to offensive coordinator, it makes these assistant coach jobs more attractive. Okay. Number one. Number two, I think anytime you have a promotion like this, it looks good for you, which kind of ties into number one. But the other part of it too is listen, I think Lance Taylor did a really good job coaching running backs the last 3 years.
I do too.
I would never disparage the job he did there. He did an excellent job. I mean, he was to me one of the best running back coaches in college football in regards to the technical manner in which he taught the players and the fact that he brought so much to the table from a pass catching standpoint, you know, as a former receiver, former NFL receivers coach. I'll counter with this and allow me to explain before some of your heads explode. I don't think this is going to be as difficult to replace as some other coaches that have the equal ability as a coach as a Lance Taylor. Okay. So this is not meant to disparage Lance Taylor at all, because again, did a great job.
He did.
This is the easiest position in football to coach.
I said that earlier to somebody.
Yeah.
I think it was either on Twitter or in a text. I can't remember anymore, but people were freaking out about it. I was like, look, it's a loss. Don't get me wrong. But to replace it is not as big of a deal as you think. And those were my exact words. Running back is the easiest position to coach.
I'll be honest. This isn't meant to be disrespectful. If you found me a good GA, like my former running back, and the assistant coach you hired was just a recruiter only and a mediocre off running backs coach, but you had a GA that had played the position, I'd say you'd be fine. And that's not meant to take away from the job he did, because a great position coach at running back is a benefit, right? So you can recognize that it's great to have a guy like that, but the reality is it doesn't take a lot to at least be a good running backs coach. There's a lot of guys that can coach running backs out there, okay? The reason that I think this is a more replaceable hire is because the one knock we've had on Lance Taylor was that he was a good recruiter, but not a great recruiter.
Sure.
And he never landed his top guys. The only time that they landed their top guy as a staff was mainly because of Chip Long, and that would be Chris Tyree. So he certainly did a lot to restock the depth chart. He was a much better recruiter than Autry Denson was. Much better. And Lance Taylor, in a short period of time, did a really good job of coaching the heck out of the running backs, developing the running backs, and he did a good enough job recruiting to where the depth chart is pretty well stacked now.
Yeah, agreed.
The thing that I would say, however, that people have to understand, because I've heard people say, somebody said to me, well, you know, you guys keep talking about how stacked the depth chart is a running back. Okay, Chip Long's the reason Chris Tyree was coming. When it was just Lance Taylor in the mix, he was leaning towards Oklahoma. Once Chip kind of got back and pushed heavy, that's when they were able to get Chris Tyree into the fold. He didn't recruit Logan Diggs. Logan Diggs has said this. His recruiters were Terry Joseph and Tommy Reese. And when Terry Joseph left, that's part of the reason that Logan Diggs almost went to LSU is because the guy that recruited him was gone. So he only recruited half the running backs in the room.
Sure.
You know, and that's okay because it's supposed to be a staff effort, right? I mean, you took advantage of Terry Joseph having connections in Louisiana. Nothing wrong with that. The point is I got to have a running backs coach that's a dynamic recruiter. And Lance was not a dynamic recruiter. Excellent coach, not a dynamic recruiter, which is why one of the things I advocated at the beginning of this coaching search was I wouldn't be opposed to having him be the receivers coach and bring in like a Tony Alford as the running backs coach. Now, full disclosure, Tony Alford's a friend of mine and someone I've known for a long time. I think I think he can equal Lance Taylor as a coach, but he's a more dynamic recruiter. The reason I bring Tony Alford up, not to say that he's a candidate or he's going to get the job. I'm not speaking on who the candidates are today. I've heard 4 names mentioned to me today by different sources. All are really good coaches. Some of them are more dynamic recruiters than others. They've got to have a dynamic recruiter here. And if you're not a dynamic recruiter, I can't jump on board with that because I'll be honest, the offensive line coach can have as much of an impact on the way the running backs are coached as the running backs coach can. Because I'm going to tell you something right now. If the running backs coach is teaching one thing and Harry Hiestand steps in the room and says, you're not doing it that way, you're going to do it this way, then you're going to do it the way the offensive line coach wants it done. Because you have to run behind the offensive line.
Right, sure.
I'm not saying Harry Hiestand would ever do that. I know that's happened before with offensive line coaches at places. I'm not saying it's happened in Notre Dame. Got to be a more dynamic recruiter. I think this is a chance to upgrade your coaching staff, which is saying a lot because Lance Taylor was really good. Please hear me on this. This is not a knock on Lance Taylor. As a position coach, he did a really, really good job. It's just that I don't care about that all that much as a running back specifically.
Sure.
Now, give me a great coach and a good recruiter at receiver, and I'm happy about that. Because that's a position where I feel like coaching is so much more important and the product can sell itself a little bit more than at running back, where I think a good recruiting running backs coach can impact your whole roster. I mean, look at the role that Tony Alford had in getting Aaron Lynch here, right? I mean, Aaron Lynch was the driving force. I mean, Tony Alford was the driving force behind Aaron Lynch, not Mike Elston. So I think that's an important thing. And I could go down a list of guys that Tony Alford had a role in. And I'm not making the point again about Tony Alford. I'm just using him as an example. And the reason I say it is because if you moved Lance Taylor out to receivers, that's a big upgrade from a coaching standpoint over Dale Alexander. Sure. And I think he's a better recruiter than Dale Alexander. And then you're getting an equal coach and a superior recruiter at running back. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's why I would have advocated for that move, because I do think Lance Taylor is a really good football coach. I just don't think he's a great recruiter, and not a bad one by any stretch. Just not. It's just this is my personal preference, Vince. I just feel like if you don't have a running backs coach that's an elite recruiter, you're not doing this thing right. And that's why it was so bad to have Autry Denson as your running backs coach, because he wasn't just not a good recruiter. He was a bad recruiter, like just flat out bad recruiter. And so to me, this is why I think there's an opportunity to upgrade here at this position.
No, there's no question. And I thought that he did a really good job once the guys were in his room, right? I mean, I think he's a really good coach. And I think you saw like, for example, the stiff arm. Like, they practice that every day in practice. I mean, we've seen videos of them practicing the stiff arm, and they were really good at it. I mean, he's a really good coach once those guys are in the room. I didn't like some of the things that happened on the recruiting trail with him, and I can't necessarily completely blame him, because he doesn't necessarily put together like, okay, my plan is to only go after one running back.
No, that was his plan. No, I mean, look,
okay.
He's the running backs coach. I mean, if he wants to recruit more than one guy, he's allowed to recruit more than one guy.
Okay, all right. So like the Will Shipley thing, I didn't like that. You know, you put all your eggs in the Will Shipley basket, and you go someplace else, and then you're kind of left grasping at air, right? And that's a huge problem. Now, they went and did a good job of bringing in the 2 guys that they did, but it was an afterthought, and that was a problem, right? So I don't know. I feel like Marcus Freeman's biggest attribute is that he's going after guys who want to be good recruiters, great recruiters. And you're right. I could teach a guy to be a good running backs coach. I could. As a high school coach, I can teach a guy to be a good running backs coach. And so, you go get your best recruiter and then see what happens. Like that. That's how I see this as an opportunity for Notre Dame.
Yeah. So now the key is making it happen, right? Go find that guy that's a dynamic recruiter. Now, again, I'm not saying that you look for a guy who can't coach running backs. I'm not saying that. I would like the best of both worlds. That's what I would like. But if I'm going to err on the side of good at one thing, great at another thing, because that was Lance Taylor. He was great at one thing, good at another thing. He was great at the coaching aspect. He was just good at recruiting. Again, look, you don't recruit Audric Estime and Jadarian Price if you're not at least a good recruiter. He was a good recruiter. He's a solid recruiter. He needs to be. I need to have a great recruiter at running back. That's just one of those positions where it's kind of like corners. That's a position where I think you need to be really good at both. It's a little different than running back, but like I can't have a guy that's just a good coach but not a good recruiter at corners coach. You got to have both. D-line's another position like that where you've got to have a really good recruiter. Now, running back is the one position that's unique that you don't necessarily need a great coach. But it'd be nice if you can do both. And in a place like Notre Dame, you should expect both. And that's why, for me, like there was one name that was mentioned by another network that people told me about. I didn't see it personally, but, that's how it goes is something happens and I get a million texts and tweets about it. And I was like, that's the next Lance Taylor, right? Like that's what that hire would be. Really good position coach, just an okay recruiter, not a dynamic needle moving recruiter. And to me, if you settle for a guy like that, then you're okay. Like I said, keeping Lance Taylor's not a bad thing. I would have been fine keeping Lance Taylor. But it goes back to there's another final piece of this too, Vince. I talked about this yesterday in an article, and I know you didn't get a chance to read it yet because you've been out at the coaches clinic.
I may have. I've been reading some of your stuff while I was in there.
It's like I was just bored at the clinic, so I was like, I'll read some of Driscoll's stuff. What the heck? Sorry, I mean, spit out your drink. So the article I wrote basically was that a lot of this coaching turnover, and this was kind of before I knew officially that Lance Taylor was leaving.
Sure.
I'd been told that he was looking, he was interviewing for the OC job. Because, again, he got promoted. This isn't a lateral move. We
need to talk about that, too, by the way.
Right.
I want to talk about that aspect.
Somebody had said on Twitter, and I shouldn't even be quoting what someone said on Twitter because it's Twitter. But, they were upset like, Freeman can't keep the staff together. This is a dumpster fire. And I'm like, yeah, darn that Marcus Freeman for not being able to convince Lance Taylor to stay and be the running backs coach when he can go be the offensive coordinator at a Power 5 school.
That's nonsense. That's nonsense.
Right. I mean, this is a good thing. This is a good thing for Lance.
Yeah.
This is a good thing for Notre Dame. If you've got a coach that's here for a long time, chances are he's not a hot commodity somewhere else. There's the rare occasion that a Mike Elston stays out of loyalty to his family and things like that. Because that was not a sideways, a side swipe at Mike Elston now that he's gone. He's the exception.
He wanted to stay.
He turned down
many opportunities.
But you don't turn down D coordinator jobs or offensive coordinator jobs to stay at a place like Notre Dame unless they're bad jobs. And Louisville is not a bad job. Now, somebody said to me, well, but that coach is on the hot seat. And I said, well, so was Brian Kelly when Mike Elko and Chip Long came. But that's what you do. If you believe in yourself and your ability to get something going, then you're not afraid of a coach being on the hot seat as long as it's not a hot seat situation where he has no chance to stay. Like I would not have jumped on the LSU coaching staff last year. No way. I would not have jumped on Clay Helton's coaching staff last year. Like that was a dead man walking.
Yeah,
Scott Satterfield's in a situation where he's a bit on the hot seat, but they want him to succeed at Louisville. And so like Jack Swarbrick wanted Brian Kelly to survive and be successful at Notre Dame. So it's a more healthy hot seat to jump into. Lance Taylor is very confident in his abilities as a coach to get that thing turned around. And because they've played Louisville twice in the last 3 years, he has a firsthand knowledge of the kind of offense that they can have there. And I think recruiting-wise, that more fits the kind of guy he likes to go after too. I think that'll fit much better there for him. Now, the thing for me is, and I'm going to lose some of you on this one. I understand that.
Uh-oh.
But for me, I think some of these losses, even guys that are good coaches that I like, I don't think is a bad thing. And here's why I say it. And here's the article, the point I made in the article. Now, obviously, you don't see turnover at a coaching staff that's gone 54-10 the last 5 years, and that's made a playoff appearance in 2 of the last 3 years and was, just this close from making a third one like they were this year. And when those things do happen, it tends to be a guy leaves, a promotion happens, and you kind of keep the same group of people. Well, in this instance, the promotion was from a guy that had only been here for a year. And it was a guy that in a year sort of laid waste to a lot of the excuses that had existed in the program for a decade.
From a recruiting standpoint, right?
Well, not just a recruiting standpoint, in a lot of ways. I mean,
Okay.
It's about, we talk the emotion of playing football, right? Not being a business-like coach, being investing in your players beyond just what can they do for me. Like, there's a lot of things that Marcus Freeman is the complete opposite of Brian Kelly in. Recruiting is obviously part of it, and that's a big part of it. But I'm not turning over my entire coaching staff just for recruiting. It's got to be more than that. And for me,
Sure.
It is more than that. But it all ties together, Vince. It's this acceptance of who we are. Well, we can't win at Notre Dame that way because of this. That's the cancer that had kind of grown in the Brian Kelly coaching staff. The notion that we've got, Mike Elson, for example, love Mike Elson. Great guy, did a great job at Notre Dame. But at times he kind of bought into the whole, we've got to shop down a different aisle nonsense that Brian Kelly created.
He flat out said it on numerous occasions,
right?
Because he would get interviewed as the recruiting.
Part of that is he's being a good soldier and saying what
Absolutely.
the head coach, but then his actions to a degree back that up. And the reality is we don't see Tyson Ford in this class if it's not from in the 2022 class if it's not from Marcus Freeman. We don't see Brennan Vernon and Keon Keeley in the 2023 class if it's not for Marcus Freeman. Mike Elson played a key role in that, but it was Marcus Freeman that said, we got to go get those guys, not the guys we've been getting, because the guys we've been getting are why we keep getting embarrassed when we get into these big games, right? We've got to do better. And, his notion of we're going to convince this kid that he is a Notre Dame guy, right? As opposed to just looking for guys that think that they are. But it's also about how you go about your business every day, more competition and all this type of things. And when you have more people that have spent multiple years in that coaching staff on your staff, there's deprogramming you have to do with the coaches.
Yeah, that's true.
And right now, I mean, really, you've got Tommy Rees, who's been here for 5 years, and you've got John McNulty, who's been here for 2, and Mike Mickens that's been here for 2, who has coached with Marcus Freeman a lot longer, longer than he coached for Brian Kelly. And Chris O'Leary's been here for 2 years. So there's a lot more Marcus Freeman hires now there's going to be more Marcus Freeman hires on the staff than Brian Kelly hires. If you want, unless you could count Harry Heastand as a Brian Kelly hire, but Harry Heastand's not coming back if Brian Kelly still had football coach.
Yeah, exactly.
And because Harry Heastand he didn't like how Brian Kelly did those type of things. So in that regards, Vince, I think it's a positive. And I would also, the other thing too, is I would rather it all happen now in between before he even gets to year 1 than he coaches a year and then you lose a bunch of guys.
Because then I think that tells a different story.
Correct.
Right? I mean,
Correct.
That tells a story of like, well, we tried this out for a year and it's not really going the way we think it's going to go, right? Lance Taylor leaving is because he got a promotion.
Right.
Like that, you can sell that to your next running backs coach. Like, look, come to Notre Dame. If you're looking to move up in the world, and what coach really isn't, for the most part, 9 out of 10 of them, I would say, are, you've got an opportunity here. We can get you to that next level, or maybe that next level is here at Notre Dame. You never know, right? And so that's why the Lance Taylor move, while I was a little bit surprised, I'm not quote unquote worried about it, because it's a promotion.
Mm-hmm.
He got promoted. And I actually said this decade ago when at the high school level, I take offense if somebody leaves my staff or a staff that I'm on for a lateral move.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's up with that? You know what I mean? But if somebody leaves the staff for a promotion, then you shake their hand, you pat them on the butt, and you wish them luck, man, because that's how it works. Like, I have no problem with that. And that's my own personal mantra is I'm not leaving a staff unless it's for a promotion, unless there's other issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can talk about that. But if you're leaving a staff, it better be for a promotion. And that's where I'm at with this one. This one doesn't bother me at all. I like Lance Taylor a lot as a coach, but I think you can find somebody just as good, and maybe you find somebody better. You never know. But like, I don't know. This one doesn't bother me. It's not a needle mover for me right now.
Right. It's not. We're not saying it doesn't bother me from the standpoint of, oh, we're glad he's gone. It's not what we're saying. Not at all.
Yeah, not at all.
It's just this one makes sense. I mean, this is a good thing.
This is how coaching works.
Right. Right. And the reality is, and somebody asked a great question along these lines. Q Kib says, do you guys think this allows Marcus Freeman to do more of what he wants and able to design the program in his own way? And that's absolutely right.
Yes.
And Charlie Weiss's belt loop says, he is the head coach. So yes, but it's not that simple. When you're replacing a coach who had the level of record success that Brian Kelly had, then and you've been able to keep a lot of those coaches on staff, there is a level of I have to accept that certain things are the way that they are, and you can't change everything at once, right? Because there are coaches who are going to do things a certain way and those types of things. And so I do think this allows him to better do things the way he wants it. He can structure practice the way that he wants it, even more so now. He doesn't have to, well, so-and-so like doing it this way and so-and-so like doing it that way. And this is how they've always done it in the past. And I'm having trouble convincing them that this is the better way. Now it's a bunch of new guys where you're saying, hey, if you're going to come on board, this is how we're going to do it. And you've got to be on board with that. And I think that's a positive. I think that's definitely a positive for Notre Dame. So that's what I meant by, I think this turnover is a good thing if the hires are made the right way.
Right.
Because we said all we said about Lance Taylor, but here's the thing about Lance Taylor. Because he was a really good position coach and at least a solid recruiter, there is a chance you could have someone worse. Like, as much as I question Chancey Stuckey, I don't think he's worse than Del Alexander.
Right.
They certainly upgraded at offensive line coach. I think they definitely upgraded at special teams with Brian Mason over Brian Polian, which we hardly talk at all about because that's another hire that was made.
Right.
And we'll get to the D-line hire in a second, but I think that could be a potential upgrade as well. Now you've got to go upgrade the running backs coach. I think the negativity that we see by some is that the receivers coach wasn't who we wanted. And I'll accept that. I've said that. But it doesn't mean it's not an improvement over what it was, because it is. So home run at offensive line. I think he made a great hire on special teams from what I know about him. And so far, Chancey Stuckey, from what I've been told from people I respect, is a guy that they think has a very high ceiling. Certainly an upgrade over what they had, in my opinion. But that's not saying a whole lot. But so that Vince, that's the running back situation. Let's transition to the defensive line hire.
Absolutely.
Marcus Freeman has hired. This is fact. I was able to get this confirmed from sources. Obviously, Pete Thamel of ESPN had it first, but we were able to confirm it that it's definitely happening. That Al Washington from Ohio State is going to be the defensive line coach and run game coordinator at Notre Dame.
Which was Elston's title as well, right?
Correct. He was the linebackers coach at Ohio State the last 3 years. He was the defensive line coach at Michigan in 2018. He was the defensive line coach at Cincinnati in 2017, which was Luke Fickell and Marcus Freeman's first season at Cincinnati. He coached defensive line for a year before that at Boston College, where he played college football. And then he was also a special teams coach and a running backs coach at one point in time during his tenure in Boston College. So he's done a lot of different things. He's only have, I think 3 years as an actual defensive line coach. So when I first when I first heard about Al Washington, my first question was, okay, why has he coached linebackers for 4 years in a row now?
Sure.
And what I was told was because he wanted to beat Ohio State. And because, again, he's from Ohio, right? And his dad played at Ohio State. Al Washington's dad played Ohio State. He is good friends with Ryan Day. They coached together for multiple years at Boston College. So he was part of Ryan Day's first full coaching staff at Ohio State. So it was about coming to kind of coach with his friend and coach at Ohio State, where
Sure.
you're from, that kind of thing. And then the thought was that whenever Larry Johnson left, he would take over as the D-line coach. Well, obviously, when Jim Knowles came in, Jim Knowles wanted to bring in his own staff or have a say in they turned over everybody but Larry Johnson.
Right.
And so obviously Al Washington is now coming here. Now, the backstory behind this, Vince, is this was a little interesting. So this cost Notre Dame some money. I'll just put it to you like this. Al Washington turned down the Tennessee defensive coordinator job a year ago. And he had Florida and Georgia both pushing hard to get him down there. Now, when Florida hired Sean Spencer, that took them out, which was good for Notre Dame. It was a plus for Notre Dame because that's just one more big-time suitor. Georgia was also pushing for him. And Marcus Freeman was able to convince Coach Washington to not pursue Georgia and he was considering, doing some other things. And Coach Freeman was able to convince him, hey, this is where you want to be. Convincing him with his vision for the program, their past relationship, and convincing him to come to Notre Dame. Like Notre Dame's throwing around some money.
He never actually had a sit-down interview, like a formal interview with Georgia, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
No, that was the concern as of yesterday, that they were pushing hard for him to come down, and Notre Dame was trying to get this one done before that happened.
Right.
Which is why I pushed back on some of it's going to be Al Washington, because it wasn't there yet. They had some work that they had to do, and they were able to get it done. And, he's already called players. He's calling parents already. I mean, he's hitting the ground running, which I'm excited about. So that's kind of
he's a pretty good recruiter.
And that's a little bit of the backstory. I have a couple other things I'm going to read, but that's a little bit of the backstory about Ohio State. And let me address something. People keep talking about this. This is kind of driving me crazy a little bit. People say, well, weren't the Ohio State linebackers bad this year? Everything about Ohio State's defense was bad this year. I want to remind you, in 2015 and 16, Notre Dame had the worst 2-year stretch of run defense in school history. Do you know who the linebackers coach was on that team? This is Mike Elston.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when your coordinating and your play calling is bad, I don't care what you do as your linebackers coach. However, if you go, I've talked to some people at Ohio State, and they said the linebackers were getting better and better as the year went on. Once they made the change at coordinator, that helped the linebacker. That's very young linebackers. Cody Simon was a part of that. Tommy Eichenberg, I think, had like 17 tackles in the Fiesta Bowl. The Rose Bowl. But 2020 and 2019, the Ohio State linebackers were really good. I think in 2 drafts, because he's only been there for 2 drafts, they've had 3 linebackers taken in the second or third round of the draft. I believe 3 in 2 years. That's pretty good, right? It's pretty good. He was credited a lot with developing Baron Browning, who was a highly ranked kid that didn't do anything his first couple years at Ohio State. And then under Al Washington was good. But I was kind of nervous about the whole he hadn't coached a lot of D-line thing.
Sure, yeah.
So I reached out to some of my sources in the coaching profession, and people were like, everybody else wanted him to be D-line. Only Ohio State wanted him to coach linebackers. So I'm just not overly concerned about what he did at Ohio State, because I think that was more of a problem with combination of youth with just Kerry Coombs did a terrible job this year, which is why he got fired, I think, like in the first month of school of the season, and not fired, but he had play calling duties removed.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't bother me. I think that the reputation he has, he did a great job at BC, had Zach Allen and Harold Landry. He recruited Harold Landry to Boston College, even when he wasn't the D-line coach. And then, of course, Harold Landry turns into a second-round pick. He had Zach Allen. He coached Zach Allen. He became a third-round pick. So he's produced a lot of NFL players. And here's something that I got from a friend of mine, Brendan Gulick, who covers Ohio State. I'm just going to read what Brendan said to me about Al Washington. He said, I thought our linebackers last year were really good, talking about 2020, were really good. And this year we were so young, but made good progress throughout the year. Look at how Tommy Eichenberg played in Pasadena, 17 tackles, and he was literally all over the place. Al is a good dude. He is genuine. He loves ball and he wants to win, but I think he really values good relationships in his room. There's a toughness about his personality that I have always liked. Now, here's the other funny thing. So I asked about the recruiting aspect of it. I asked Sonny Styles' mom, because I've talked to her a few times, really nice lady. I asked Sonny Styles' mom if I could just kind of get her thoughts off the record about the job he did recruiting Sonny. And I'm not from a Notre Dame standpoint, like, hey, come to Notre Dame, but more, hey, what was it like? Because I've had some people said, well, he's a bad recruiter. Oh, he beat Marcus Freeman for Sonny Styles.
Right.
I'm just saying. But here's what she said. Her first response was, I'll go on the record. So I told you all that I said I was asked her off the record. So her first response is, I'll go on the record. He was instrumental in recruiting Sonny to Ohio State. He offered Sonny after his first high school game. Let him know he was special and versatile, didn't need to watch any more games to make an offer. That meant a lot to Sonny and our family. Other than Notre Dame, many of the other big programs didn't offer until later, and by then, Ohio State established a great relationship with Sonny, liked him as a coach. He's a class act, wishing him the best at Notre Dame. So, obviously that was one that I was curious about. Like, I was curious. I wanted her to say, like, well, really, his dad playing at Ohio State or Ryan Day played a big role. It was actually so-and-so. But no, she's like, he was instrumental in getting him here. So, because he was Sonny Styles' main recruiter. The only linebacker class in the country that could compete for Notre Dame in regards to was it better than Notre Dame's or as good as Notre Dame's was Ohio State's, who Al Washington put together. He signed 5-star CJ Hicks. He signed 5-star Sonny Styles. He signed Gabe Powers, who was a top 100 recruit. And then he also had a recruit from the McCullough kid who was a top 250 linebacker, but he ended up flipping to Indiana to play for his dad. So, there you go. So everything I've heard about this was huge. And the reason I'm bringing it up about Sonny Styles, because remember, in the linebackers at Ohio State, is because that's the position that Al Washington was coaching in Ohio State.
And that's basically the position. It's either Notre Dame or Ohio State with the two best linebacking recruits in 22, right? I mean,
correct.
So, yeah, I think that's legit. That's a legit thing to bring up.
So I also like the fact he has strong Midwestern ties, because I do think Notre Dame needs to start doing a better job of winning more Midwestern battles, especially on defense, and being able to identify more Midwestern kids. I think sometimes Notre Dame has gone away from the Midwest a little too much at certain positions. And I think this helps with Brennan Vernon, keeping Brennan Vernon in the class. Obviously, he's going to be familiar with Al Washington from that time there, because Al Washington was one of the guys that was always the secondary recruiter for a lot of the in-state kids in Ohio, because he was, he was the Ohio guy.
Because he's an Ohio guy, yeah.
Right. And so everything I've heard about this hire is positive. I actually had two people tell me that I said, and again, I'm not making this claim because I don't know enough about Al Washington to make this claim. And I feel like perhaps I have a bias because I do know Mike Elston so well. So I'm just telling you what I've been told. But I had two people who are really connected to coaching and or recruiting who told me he'll be a better recruiter at Notre Dame than Mike Elston was immediately, which shocked me. And again, I'm not saying I agree with it because I don't know enough about Al Washington as a recruiter, just to be honest. I don't cover Ohio State, right? And I was surprised by that, right? And so I was like, whew. Well, you saw Keon Keeley's response to Al Washington being hired.
Yeah.
He's fired up about it.
Yes, he is.
That was almost worth hiring him just there if he can keep him. So everything I've heard about the Al Washington hire is great. I've talked to he's already talked to Notre Dame players. He's already reached out to them. He's already reached out to Notre Dame parents already. He
accepted the job this morning.
Yes,
right?
He called Coach Freeman today, earlier this morning, and accepted the job.
By the way, send me those contact information. It's like I'm taking the
right.
job. Send me the contact
I mean that was great. I mean he's already it's been not even 4 hours since he took the job, and he's already on the phone with parents.
That's awesome.
So
that doesn't tell you about his recruiting chops,
right? Well, and then but then it backs up what Mrs. Styles said and what Brendan said. Both of them talked about relationships. That's going to fit in really well with what Marcus Freeman wants, which is not just hey, can you coach football, but can you develop these young men?
Yeah, right.
And I'll be honest, like one thing I've heard about Ryan Day as a head coach is there's been a big change at Ohio State in recent years about it's not just about football all the time anymore, like it was with Urban.
Sure.
Where we care about making sure our kids are going to class. I've been told that about Ryan Day. He actually cares about whether or not his kids are going to class. Now, will they make an exception for a 5-star kid? I'm sure. But he cares about that, right? I mean, that's important to me. And he's hired coaches that have done that. We know Tony Alford's that way, right? Larry Johnson's that way. Al Washington's that way. Kerry Coombs is that way. He just didn't get the job done as a coordinator. He is a perfect example of some people are just meant to be position coaches. And they're just not great coordinators.
Yeah.
Well, they had to replace Kerry Coombs because they made him a coordinator. And sometimes when you hire a guy to be a coordinator that can't get, and he doesn't get the job done, you can't just demote him and keep him on staff as a position coach. He's got to go. And that was always my danger about keeping Mike Elson on as defensive coordinators. I don't know if he would have done a great job at defensive coordinator. And so if he doesn't work and you got to move on, you can't just put him back to coaching the defensive line. So anyway, I think from everything I know of this, and again, I'm going to do more research from everything I know about this. I didn't watch a lot of Ohio State's defense this year. I watched a lot more of their defense the last 2 years, and their linebackers were very good. And so I think it was a strong hire. Now, Vince, I know we have a lot of super chats about this hire.
I starred everything. So everything's in the starred category to kind of organize it.
So we'll go with the super chats. We'll go. Was this the first one? Are they these? Well, hopefully they're in some sort of order. So there you go.
I think they're in. I think they go or time wise, or maybe when I start them. But either way, they're in order. Is it Casa or Casa? I'm going to go with Casa Hodge. Thank you so much for the super chat. Is it fair to say, outside of Dell and Quinn, that the coaches that were on the staff were looking elsewhere to leave once Kelly left, but didn't find the right opportunities to do it sooner? No, I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that it just with the Elston situation, it was the timing of it. It's just the way it all went down, and the fact that he wasn't going to be the DC was obviously part of it. And then the Taylor was he got a promotion. Like that wasn't sitting out there waiting for him.
Mike Elson's not leaving anywhere but for Michigan.
Right. Exactly.
And Lance Taylor got an offensive coordinator job. There wasn't that offer out there before. Right. And if he's not offered an offensive coordinator job, he's not leaving.
He's not leaving. Yes.
So look, coaching turnover happens when you are successful. Right. Notre Dame's been successful. Alabama just lost Georgia just lost their receivers coach to LSU. You know what I mean? Like Bama's losing coaches. You're going to lose coaches when you're successful. And I will tell you all this. If you're not losing coaches, that's a bad sign, because that means other teams don't want them. Because I don't care how loyal you are, nobody's just going to stay in place at positions and just stay there.
Right.
I don't want to be a defensive coordinator. I like coaching corners the rest of my life. Most guys have some level of, at least some guys on staff. Some coaches are perfectly comfortable with where they are, but a lot of coaches, they want to be head coaches. And that's part of the reason Mike Elson left, is he has aspirations beyond just being a defensive line coach. Well, that wasn't going to happen at Notre Dame. And the other thing too about the right opportunities to do it so far, I mean, Mike Elson was offered like life-changing money to go to LSU.
Right.
If it was just about, wanting to get out, he would have taken that job. And if if Sean Nua doesn't go to USC, he was the D-line coach of Michigan. Mike Elson's still on the staff. Lance Taylor, he's not leaving for a lateral move. This is not like a co-coordinator role. This is an offensive coordinator role. So I think this isn't that. I understand why people feel that way, because these things are kind of happening
all at once, and it's like in consecutive.
Yeah, but that's just the nature of the timing, because people are getting back to school. A lot of hires are happening because, look, administrators don't hang around during the winter break like coaches do.
That's a good point.
Right? People say, why aren't these hires being made for Notre Dame being made official? Because for the first 2 weeks of them being hired, there wasn't anybody on campus to do the things that needed to get done to make these things official, right? Because they're on vacation.
Yeah, exactly.
So, these things, especially at a place like Notre Dame, these things take time. This is also the coaches' convention was last week. And a lot of these discussions and things like that happen there. And as coaches leave, the dominoes start to kind of fall. And that's just the nature of recruiting. It's just Notre Dame hasn't always had a lot of great coaches that people wanted. So I think that's part of it too. But anyway, go with this next one, Vince.
You got it, Kevin O'Neill. Thank you so much for the super chat, Kevin. You guys worried about this hire considering the poor Buckeye D and Day obviously cleaning house on the defensive side of the ball? Thanks, fellas. IB Nation rocks. I know we kind of touched on this a little bit before, but
I'm not concerned about it. I'm not, because number one, the linebackers were good, really good his first 2 years. We had Malik Harrison and Pete Werner in 2019. Yeah. 2020 and Baron Browning 2020. They lost Malik Harrison, but they still had Pete Werner, who was a second-round pick. And they also had Baron Browning, who was a third-round pick of the Broncos. They lost all their linebackers, and they hired a new D coordinator who did a bad job. So the only way I can be worried about this year is if my thought is he forgot how to coach football. Right. He was also part of the 2018 Michigan staff that I think that year finished second in the nation in total defense and was a top 10 scoring defense. That was the Michigan team that lost to Notre Dame and Ohio State the beginning and end of the season and then beat everybody else in between. So I'm not overly concerned about it, Kevin, because I think we have to look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that he had a lot of success at different places. This year was a bad year, but he didn't forget how to coach football this year. Right. I think the other part of that conversation is it's not that Ryan Day is cleaning house on the defensive side of the ball as much as it's Jim Knowles. He hired Jim Knowles as his defensive coordinator. Well, Jim Knowles coaches linebackers.
Yeah, exactly. And he wanted he's going to bring in some of his own guys. And
well, I don't know if he's bringing in his own guys because he hasn't hired anyone from Oklahoma State. But he wants to have a say in who is the position coaches.
Right.
But the reality is that Jim Knowles is a linebackers coach, and he wants to be a linebackers coach. I mean, it's like if Notre Dame already had a good linebackers coach last year when Marcus Freeman was hired, chances are that guy's not going to still be here because Marcus Freeman coached linebackers. So it had as much to do with that as anything. And some of the other cleaning house was cleaning house. It was needed. Kerry Coombs, it was time to move on from him. The Matt Barnes, I don't think did a great job with the secondary either. I think their bigger problems were beyond linebacker, where their secondary was a mess and their D line did a poor job getting pressure on the quarterback this year. That's not really on the linebackers. Linebacker play wasn't good, believe me. But I don't think that had a lot to do necessarily with him. Here's one from Michael S. Washington doesn't seem to have too much experience, never mind success, as a D-line coach, and his Ohio State linebackers last year were pretty bad. We've already addressed the one about last year's linebackers. I'm not going to get into that one again, but I would disagree with you on the success aspect of it. I think that when you look at what he did in 2016 with the Boston College defensive line, they were pretty good, right? I mean, so he's been a D-line coach for 3 years, right? And in 2016, his last year coaching defensive line at a Power 5 school, Harold Landry had 16 and a half sacks. I'd say that's pretty good. Had 22 tackles for loss, so that's a pretty good season. And the next year, Harold Landry had 8.5 tackles for loss and 5 sacks with Al Washington not there anymore. So I would argue that I think the last time he was a D-line coach, he did a pretty good job. I think the fact that he was hired consecutively by Luke Fickell, Ryan Day, or Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day is also a good sign. And Don Brown was the guy that wanted to bring him over as the defensive when he became defensive coordinator at Michigan. So I am not overly concerned about it. I mean, you can spin this any way you want to. I could spin everything positively. You could spin everything negatively. And just you as anyone, I'm just making not you, Michael. The fact of the matter is Marcus Freeman's coached with him. One of his 3 years coaching D-line was for Marcus Freeman. Whether it ends up being a good move or not, all these moves are unknowns, right? But he knows firsthand what this guy can do, and that's why he targeted him so quickly when Elson left. I think that says a lot. I think the fact that Florida and Georgia were making a run at him says a lot about what his reputation is, right? Because I've had people say, well, Ohio State fans think, and I'm like, at that point, I'm like, stop talking to me about what Ohio State fans, because my go-to is always Tennessee fans were happy as you know what when Harry Hiestand left, right? he can't coach, he can't recruit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right? And so the people that I know that I trust in the business, people that have always shot me straight about things, are the first people I called about Al Washington because I wanted to know more. Hey, look, because my first thought is that guy just got let go to Ohio State. I had a lot of the same thoughts y'all had, which is why I'm not hammering y'all for this. I'm just sharing with you what I'm being told because I had similar thoughts. Like, boy, a year ago, this guy is like turning down the D coordinator job at Tennessee, and now he's being let go. Like, what happened? And I've heard some stories about what was going on at Ohio State this year that had nothing to do with Al Washington. Right. As the reasons why that. And it was just when Jim Knowles came in, he's the linebackers coach. Your new D coordinator is your linebackers coach. Well, they're not going to fire Larry Johnson. Now, maybe they should, because I think Ohio State's D-line has been very underwhelming, but he's a legend. You're not going to get rid of him.
Right.
And so there really wasn't anywhere for Al Washington to go. And that's why he was let go. And so I understand where some of y'all are coming from, but I'm just not as concerned about it, because I would be if I was you guys. And that's what I want to make sure people understand is some of the questions that people have are things that I asked my sources and the people. And when I talk about people I trust, none of them are at Notre Dame, because obviously people at Notre Dame are going to give you they're going to spin it a certain way that looks good for them. I'm talking about friends of mine in the coaching business that aren't at Notre Dame, that are at other schools, multiple places. And then talking to parents of kids who were recruited by Al Washington. Those are the things I wanted to do. And I've been doing that really now for a few days now, ever since, I got word that Al Washington was going to be a top candidate. But early on, it wasn't looking good because people are concerned that all these big-time SEC schools are coming at him. But Notre Dame did what it needed to do to convince him to come, not just with the vision for what we want to do. It being a Midwestern school, I think, helped him, but also stepping up in that regards was big as well,
which I love. And Notre Dame has now about a year's worth of track record of stepping up financially for assistant coaches, and that's a great step in the right direction. Gregory Gilbert with the super chat, thank you very much. I'm going to believe in Freeman until he gives me a reason not to. I expect rookie coaching mistakes this coming season and want to see if he can fix those mistakes and adjust to what is going on. I think that's a fair and actual centered place to be. I mean, that's I agree with you, Gregory. I mean, Marcus Freeman's not perfect, and we will not say that he's perfect, but he's doing a good job of taking what the world is giving him right now when it comes to coaching hires and recruiting and all of those things. And what I've been impressed with Marcus Freeman over the last, I will say, month, is he's proactive with a lot of things. He's not necessarily reacting to a lot of these things. He's being very proactive. I mean, he as soon as the Lance Taylor information kind of got out there, he and Tom Reese were out, talking to guys about replacement. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't just let things happen to him. He's being proactive, and that's a good start.
Well, the other thing too with the running back situation, one thing there's a lot I can't say on it right now for many obvious reasons, but one thing I can say, I'm comfortable saying, is they didn't wait for Lance Taylor to accept the job to start looking for his replacement. And what I mean by that, it's not that whole Brian Kelly, if you looking, you better get the job. It's not that. It's just, if he leaves, we're going to be prepared.
Right.
And I like that. I mean, as of yesterday, they were on the phone with running back coaches they like. Coaches, plural. So they're going to be active. They're going to make a push. I think a concern a lot of people, the Chancey Stuckey thing is really just, I think, a stumbling block for a lot of people. I understand it completely, because you thought, I mean, we're talking Holman Wiggins and Jamarcus Shepard, right? Like Alabama, Purdue, like one of the best receiver coaches in the business. And you settled on a guy that had been a coach for 1 year, as if A, they got turned down, or B, they settled on these. That was a guy that they felt just really blew him away. And not every other hire needs to be viewed in that lens. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be completely honest with you. When I was told last night that it was down to 3 coaches, it was Al Washington, it was Randall Joyner, who's the D-line coach at Ole Miss, when I was really I was intrigued by him quite a bit as well. And then the third one was Tyler Stockton. former Notre Dame player, defensive coordinator at Ball State. I literally said to a buddy, I got a really bad feeling they're going to hire Tyler Stockton. And that's not meant as an insult to Tyler Stockton. I think eventually he has a chance to be a pretty good receivers coach or D-line coach. The problem is I just don't think he's there yet. And now's not the time to go bring a guy in just because he's an alum. As I've said to some friends of mine, if Tyler Stockton was an alum of any other school than Notre Dame, I don't think anyone at Notre Dame is pushing for him to be the next D-line coach. And some people were even saying like he should be the next D coordinator. It's like, wow, okay. I just really kind of was like, I mean, I kind of had that Notre Dame fan for 30 years of failure and disappointment kind of start to come into me even. And I was like, man, they're going to end up with flipping Tyler Stockton. I just know it. And I don't mean that in an insulting manner to Tyler Stockton. I really don't. And then not only did they not get Tyler Stockton, they got the number one guy on Marcus Freeman's board. Now, we can argue whether he should or shouldn't be number one, but that's who he wanted. That's who he wanted.
Yeah.
And that's who, you know, Georgia and Florida were going after as well. So I like it. I like it. I'm happy. I'm happy with it.
John, thank you so much for the super chat. John, join the board. Lots of questions I'm seeing are answered there. It's worth it. That is all. Go Irish. Hit the like button.
Yeah.
Look, let me tell you something about the board, guys. Okay, so obviously I'm on the board. I am not really a board guy.
You're not a poster. You're
not
lurker.
a poster. Exactly. And so when I want inside information before the board existed, I would text Brian. Okay. And he's busy. He's working. He wouldn't always get back to me right away. So I don't even text him anymore for the most part. I go to the board and he gets the same information that he would have given me, a guy who works with him at Irish Breakdown.
And has been a friend longer than you've worked with me.
Exactly. And
see, now you're making me look like a jerk, like I put business ahead of my friendships.
No. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the same information he would give me, he's putting on the board. Mm-hmm. And that's how valuable it is to
not everything, because I did tell you about Coach Elston leaving several days before it happened.
And I was worthless for like 48 hours. Yeah. But that's beside the point.
That's the real reason we canceled Monday's show, because I was afraid Vince was going to spill it. But I can't keep it in. It's too new. It's too raw.
It's too raw. Yeah. But no, what I'm saying is the intel is there, and it is such good information.
Good sales pitch. Yep. Don't worry. You'll get your bonus in this month's check. Let's move on to the next one.
All right. Moving on.
I pulled another one.
Oh, you did put one up there. Patrick, my man, thank you so much for the super chat. How does Washington size up against Elston as far as recruiting success? Well, he just signed arguably the first or second best linebacker recruiting class in the
it's second to me. I mean, it's second to me. Notre Dame's is better in my opinion.
That's fair.
People argue about it, but I mean, my opinion, it's not a better class now because it makes Washington look better.
Right.
Notre Dame's class was still better. I'll say this. It was more impressive that they were able to put that together while in the midst of a dumpster fire of a defensive season.
True.
I think that's impressive. But if you're just going to go off top recruits, he stacks up better than Elston. I don't think that's necessarily fair, though. Because, he was the primary recruiter for C.J. Hicks, who was a 5-star. He's the primary recruiter for Sonny Styles, who was a 5-star. He was a primary recruiter for Gabe Powers, who was a top 100 kid. Well, the thing is Reed Carrico is another linebacker he signed that was a top 100 kid, but they were all in-state kids.
Yeah.
Well, if Marcus Freeman, if Mike Elston was able to sign a bunch of 5-star Indiana kids, he'd have a better track record. So it would be spin, in my opinion, to say he's better than Mike Elston because of look at the results. That's not really fair. He's at Ohio State. It's easy to recruit certain positions at Ohio State, better in-state talent. So I can't really say how he stacks up in regards to effectiveness relative to what you can get at that particular school. Okay, because as I just said, he signed 4 top 100 linebackers at Ohio State this year. And in my opinion, my opinion is a couple of those guys are a little overrated, shouldn't be top 100, but they're still good players. But again, they were all in-state kids. All 4 of them were in-state kids. Makes it a little bit easier to land. But that's why I said earlier is that what I have been told by people that I trust is that he'll do better. that remains to be seen. He's got to show me, because honestly, what he did at Ohio State is good to know about him. I read you what Sonny Styles' mom said, but it's one thing to recruit at Ohio State and another thing to recruit at Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a little bit of a different animal. Can you still get that caliber player at a place like Notre Dame? That's going to be the test. The test number one is, okay, your number one priority is keeping Keon Keeley and Brendan Vernon in the class. If you can do that, then you've shown me something, right? And then add to it is step two. So that's going to be his first test. We're going to find out real early how good of a recruiter he is, and whether or not he can keep Keon Keeley in the class. If you can keep Keon Keeley in the class, then that is a grand slam home run hire, because as we've said before, Keon Keeley has the potential to be a program changer.
Yes.
I mean, that's how good he could be.
And he's going to get looks from
right.
all the top programs.
Right. I mean, Bama offered him. They're trying to get him to visit in a couple weeks. I mean, everyone's going to offer him when it's all said and done.
Yes.
And then to the point where now Brendan Vernon, Ryan Roberts mentioned this the other day in our mailbag, to the point where now Brendan Vernon's kind of being overrated or overlooked because of how excited about Keon Keeley. But those are both two really good top 100 football players, and you've got to keep them in the class. And so that's going to be an important thing. So we're going to find out very early on just how good of a recruiter he is. Can you get Jason Moore into the class? Can you go out and get some of those top players? Can you make a splash, with some Ohio kids that maybe otherwise Notre Dame's not going to get? Those are all questions we're going to find out, Patrick. I could spin it in a way that makes it look like he's better than Elston, but that's not how we roll. I can only tell you the results. I can give you the context of those results. And then after that, it's like, well, let's just wait and see. And then I can tell you what my sources say. That's why I try to do all the different, try to get all intel from all over the places, just to give as much context as I can, and then let you decide what you think about the hire.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you don't have to agree with us that this is a really good hire. My only thing is if you're going to disagree with us, I'm hoping that I can give you some more data to at least chew on, so you can be more convicted of whatever decision that you do make. And that's ultimately what we want to do here. As a person, I would always like if people agreed with me, but that's not a prerequisite. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's not as much fun either, because then conversations tend to be a lot shorter when everybody just disagrees with you all the time. So that's it. That's it. I love this. I love this one.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
So did I. That's why I put it in there. Aaron Harrison, he says, the IB Nation is worldwide. Joining you from Bonnie, Scotland. Joined IB officially today. Great content. Absolutely magic. Cheers, Brian and Vince. And cheers to you, Aaron. And thanks for tuning in, because it's got to be like, after 10 o'clock there, I do believe. It's pretty late. I think it's like 6 hour difference, something along those lines. So thanks for joining us, Aaron. Really appreciate it. And thanks for joining the boards, man. Tons of good information there. Tons of good information.
It's 9:40 right now in Scotland.
Okay, there you go. That was 5. So it's 5 hour
Then
difference.
Zacho says Justice Lowe decommitted. So you're saying there's a chance. Well played there. Well played there. Yes. About 20 minutes ago, he officially decommitted from Utah. This was a matter of time. Yeah. I mean, he'd been setting up visits to other schools already. He's going to be visiting Notre Dame at the end of the month. This isn't a surprise, but it is nice to see it officially happen, because it just means that, obviously now he definitely is still moving in the direction of leaving. So that obviously is a step in the right direction.
No question.
Yep.
No question. Kirk D.A. Anderson Fitness. Thank you for the super chat. New subscriber to IB, Notre Dame MBA class of 2006. Love the IB content. Go Irish. And thank you so much, Kirk, for the super chat. Really, really appreciate
if he was at Notre Dame in 05, probably 05 and 06, if he graduated in 06, he was there in 05 and 06, which means he got to watch a couple good years of good football.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a little jealous.
Yeah.
I'm a little jealous.
I know, right? No doubt about that. No doubt about that. All right.
Got another one.
TJ Fallon, thank you for the super chat. Is it okay that I'm happy we didn't get the ISU DC? Can't stand the 3-3-5 as a base defense.
So what you're saying is you don't like Marcus Freeman's base defense.
I was going to say, that's kind of what he runs.
That's exactly what it is. Look, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm not going to change anyone's mind about, the 3-3-5 or whatever else. Look, here's what I know. Marcus Freeman's defense will always be adaptable. It would have been adaptable if John Haycock would have come. At the end of the day, though, I'm not someone who cares as much about overall scheme. I care about fitting your personnel and being sound and aggressive and all those kind of things. I think the problem that a lot of people have with the 3-3-5 is that they still view it as a Big 12 defense, which is what it was. But there's been a lot of good coaches like Marcus Freeman who have seen how you can adapt that to actually be a really good run defense. I had a friend of mine said, well, the 3-3-5, you can't stop the run. I said, well, what makes you think that? And he started listing like all these crap Big 12 defenses. Like, well, you remember when Marcus Freeman's 3-3-5 held Georgia to, 40 rushing yards. Why? Because number one, 3-3-5 allows you to get more guys in the box, as we broke down. Number two, good coaches can easily adjust. Whenever Georgia went to their 12 personnel, Cincinnati immediately put in their 4-3 personnel. I mean, that's what good coaches do. And so I think you want to have a coach that's flexible. You want to have a coach that is able to adapt to your personnel and all those type of things. And so I have no problem. I'm fine with John Haycock not taking the job. And I'm even more fine with Marcus Freeman putting the demands on it. It's like, hey, if you want to be part of what we're doing at Notre Dame,
right, exactly.
You're going to come be a part of what we're Notre Dame. Don't tell me that you need to bring your Iowa State coaches with you. Okay, because I'm giving you a chance to work with even better football coaches.
Right.
Is the way that Marcus Freeman's looking at it. And if you don't want to be a part of that, that's cool. Stay at Iowa State. You know what I mean? That's cool. And to me, that's I'm good. And I guess that's kind of quickly about the D coordinator job. That is probably going to be the last job that's filled. I have a feeling they're going to recruit. They're going to get the running back thing figured out first. There's some things Coach Freeman is waiting on. There's some people he likes now. There's some other things that he's waiting on. There's still football being played, if you catch my drift. So I think he wants to get everything else in place and then put all his efforts into making sure that he's bringing in the right guy. Because, look, the reality is Marcus Freeman's still going to have his hands in the defense. That's just finding a coordinator that's okay with that is going to take some time. There are some guys he likes. I'm pretty confident to say that Doug Belk, who is Belk is a name that's been thrown around in a lot of places, is a guy on the board. I would caution the notion of it's a done deal or that's the guy. As of last night, he was just one of other candidates that Coach Freeman's looking at. So I'm just going to that's one I'm just going to sit back and let it play out. But I think the running back one, they're going to move somewhat quickly on to try to get the guys that they like and see who really wants to be here and who's really interested in. Because if it's just going to be about money for somebody, like, yeah, I'm all into, I don't think that's going to make the move. It needs to be somebody they know they're going to have to pay. Look, if you're going to get a big time coach, you're going to have to pay for him. But getting a big time coach who, yes, you need to pay me to make it so I can convince my family that this is the move I need to make. But it's also about finding somebody who's really excited about what Notre Dame is building. And I think that's what the interview process is going to be for Marcus Freeman. If this is just about money for you, that's cool. If you're the right guy, we'll make it work. But if it's just about money for you, then I need to look and see if there's maybe some better options out there. And Mike Huff said, and Washington is 37, so we are the youngest staff in college football. No, I don't have a clue if they're the youngest.
That's not something you can easily find. And staffs aren't complete yet. So.
And you're going to see younger staffs at some of the smaller schools as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
But, I mean, and Harry Heastand's going to jump that age up, that average age up a little bit. But no, this is the makings of a – and if they go in the direction of a couple of the D coordinators I'm hearing, those guys aren't exactly old heads either. So, yeah, it's going to be a pretty young coaching staff.
But he's putting together a staff that's kind of an image of who he is. And
I do think there can be some concerns with being too young.
Sure, I get that. I get that.
And that's what I'm curious to see. Like, does he add some veterans to the analyst role, or does he bring –
right?
To me, I'm like, hey, Coach Tressel, here's $1 million. Come hang out with us for a couple of years and help me get my feet wet. Something like that. That's not happening. I mean, I'm not saying that's happening. That's just me saying, like, I've said this about David Cutcliffe. I would hire David Cutcliffe to just be some kind of off-field role, some analyst role where he's just kind of
sounding board,
helping me, as a head coach, learn and develop. So I do think there's an advantage to having some experience on your staff. But as you said, Vince, this is certainly a reflection of who it is.
There, as I'm searching through the chat and everything, can you address the Logan Diggs situation, because
what situation?
Thank you. That's the point.
No, okay? I mean, I literally, I'm not trying to be a jerk.
People are like, oh, he's gone. He's leaving now that Taylor's gone.
Based on what? Lance Taylor didn't even recruit him.
Exactly. I just want you to just
talk. I mean, I guess I don't really know what to talk about.
He hasn't tweeted in over a week. So
he's currently enrolled at the University of Notre Dame. I'm not quite sure what else.
People are losing their minds thinking that he's going to leave because he already had a foot out the door. Now that Taylor's gone, he's going to be.
Yeah, Lance Taylor didn't recruit him, and he was ready to transfer mid-season when Lance Taylor wasn't playing him. And like, I don't think there's any loyalty to Lance Taylor there. So I don't have anything to comment on because as far as I know, his circumstance hasn't changed. Notre Dame started classes this week. Logan Diggs is on campus in classes from what I'm told. So,
and the last thing that we saw is that he put an Instagram post out there that he's at Notre Dame. Like,
I don't know. Maybe he put some rap lyrics out that people don't know their rap lyrics. And so they took those rap lyrics as like, which happens like way more than it should, you know? I can't tell how many times somebody puts something out and I'm like, dude, that's a song. Like, these kids know that. They know that. That's what, of course, that's what somebody, let these kids live there. I'm like, they're putting this stuff out on social media for a reason, you know, because they know. I mean, it's like, you let these kids live, leave them alone. Well, okay, but these are the same kids that want people to know who they are so they can get NIL deals. Okay, so, you know, whatever. It is what it is. So you want to read this one?
I will definitely do that. Triple Deck Pro, thank you very much for the super chat. I have seen Pro sounds like a nice business or something. So my fault. I have seen where Washington was responsible for landing running back Travion Henderson from Brian's talent.
No. Tony Alford landed Travion Henderson.
Right.
The way that 247 does it is they list a primary and a secondary recruiter, right? So when you click on a coach's name, it pulls up the guys that he was a secondary recruiter for as well.
Yeah.
And I believe Al Washington also is responsible for parts of the Mid-Atlantic. And so since Virginia is his area, he would talk to Travion Henderson. There was like a role he played. So he's listed as the secondary recruiter for Travion Henderson. So when you go to his name, Al Washington's profile at 247 Sports, and you look at the guys he landed, you see Travion Henderson's name there. He was a 5-star running back. But no, Tony Alford was the primary recruiter for Travion Henderson. Coach Washington just was the secondary role, which is important. I mean, it's good to have other coaches involved, and it's cool that he was part of that. But he was not. It is, to me, I think it is. I mean, I love the hire. I mean, I don't know if I said this. I don't know if I gave my opinion on this, Vince, or not. I like, from everything I know of Al Washington, everything I've learned about Al Washington the last 3-4 days, I like this hire a lot. Now he's got to go prove it. But in case there was any ambiguity on whether or not I like the hire or not, or if I was just telling you what other people are telling me, which I think is fair if you do feel that way.
Sure, yeah.
I like the hire. I fully support the hire. I think this is a great hire. I don't have nearly the questions about this hire that I had about Chancey Stuckey. Like, the only questions I have is, he hasn't coached D-line in a while. How's that transition going to be? But he played D-line. That's the thing. He played D-line at Boston College.
Right. Yep.
At the end of the day, like, I may be coaching another position, but if you ask me to go coach quarterbacks tomorrow, I'm gonna know what I'm doing, right? I mean, that's the position I played. That's like that's where my heart is. That, you know what I mean? Like, that's my baby at the end of the day. I may be coaching receivers now, but trust me, if I had to go coach running backs tomorrow or quarterbacks tomorrow, I could do that. That kind of thing. I'm speaking generally. I'm not saying. I mean, I haven't coached in a while. You get the point that I'm making. So. I think it's a strong hire. I do. I think recruiting wise is going to be a good hire. I think perception wise is going to be a good hire. I think from everything I've heard of people, I think he can coach. And at the end of the day, Marcus Freeman coached with him for a full season, and he believes he can coach what he wants in his defense. And I like the fact that he comes from primarily a 4-down background. I do like that as well.
Sure.
I'm not going to lie to you. Because my personal preference is I like 4-down defenses. I like a 4-down defense that can shift to a 3-down as opposed to a 3-down that can shift to a 4-down.
Exactly.
But that's versatility. That's my personal preference. There are coaches a lot smarter than I am that would tell you they like the exact opposite. That's why I would say get someone that can coach the heck out of whatever it is they do, and make sure you're bringing in someone who can that runs a defense that you can recruit to in that particular school, don't get hung up on the 4-2-5, 4-3, 3-4, 3-3-5. Don't get hung up on that. Does this coach have top success doing whatever it is he's going to bring? And that's the thing. Because like when they hired Marcus Freeman, like when I first started looking into Marcus Freeman a couple of years ago, I did not like the fact that he ran a 3-3-5 because I have my own feelings on a 3-3-5. But then you watch it play and you're like, okay, this guy's getting it done. This guy, it wouldn't be the defense I'd pick, but it works.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. That's all that matters.
Sean, with the Al Washington move, do you think we have a better shot at David Hicks from Allen, Texas?
I couldn't tell you, Sean. I don't know what the connection is there. I know David Hicks, I believe, is looking at Ohio State. I don't know if Al Washington is his primary recruiter or not. I can look that up real quick and see if that's the case. But I don't think David Hicks is a guy that Notre Dame's ultimately going to get because I don't think they're necessarily looking for another top defensive end, or if they would, unless they maybe view him as an inside guy, perhaps.
We've talked about their need for an inside guy, and
right,
they've been knocking it out of the park with edge guys. But
yeah, I'm looking at this now. David Hicks likes Notre Dame. He was being recruited by Mike Elston. Larry Johnson was recruiting from Ohio State, and Ohio State was not in his top group. Notre Dame is. So I don't know if this moves the needle with him a lot or not. So Vince, do we have some more starred ones? There we go. Okay,
we do. Jordan Andrew Olson, thanks for the super chat. Keeley said he loves the hire on Instagram. He did mention that. He said it was a great hire, something along those lines. So, you can only go off what these guys say, obviously, and that's a positive. It's a positive.
Yep.
Andrew Burke, thanks for the super chat. Andrew, if Notre Dame had won the Fiesta Bowl and won big, for example, 42-21, do you think the recent changes on staff, Dell Alexander, Mike Elston, Lance Taylor, etc., would still have played out the way they have?
Dell would have, because he was fired before the game.
Right.
I think, if anything, it would have probably given Lance Taylor even more opportunities to be a coordinator.
Yeah, seriously.
The only one that may have changed is Mike Elston. But I think with your score prediction, Andrew, 42-21, I don't know if that necessarily would have been an overly impressive defensive performance against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's offense is not good. Right. They look good against Notre Dame, but if you didn't watch them all year, that's not what they showed on film, except against anyone not named Kansas and TCU. They did not show that offense all year. Notre Dame made them look good, and I will say, if they would have blown Oklahoma State out, I think there's probably a little bit of a better chance that Mike Elston would have stayed. I personally think that they needed to flat out dominate Oklahoma State defensively for Elston to have gotten that job.
Yeah.
I don't think it could have been a 42-21. I think it would have had to been like a 42-10, something like that. Just because they were not a good offense, in my opinion. So I don't know how much it would have changed. I really don't.
TJ Fallon, thank you very much. Misspoke. I can't stand seeing a true 3-3-5 every play. The only thing that I didn't like about Freeman's defense was putting Foskey in pass coverage.
Now, see, that right there is a different story, though, TJ.
Yes.
The part about Foskey and pass coverage, because to me, that's not playing to the strengths of your particular players.
Agreed.
It has nothing to do with a 3-3-5 in general. I'm okay with a 3-3-5 every play as long as there's versatility and flexibility within the 3-3-5. No, I don't like not using players to the best of their ability. That was the one complaint I had with Coach Freeman's defense this year. Is Isaiah Foskey dropped into coverage too much. And I'm not afraid to admit that, right? I mean, if you it's how I've always been. It's if you do a good job, I'm going to tell you did a good job, and if you do something I don't like, I'm going to say I didn't like it. So
true.
There's that.
David Weinstein, thank you very much. What are Marcus Freeman's weaknesses as a head coach, and how might he hire assistants to address them? Well, I don't know that we have the answer really to the first part. We've seen him in one game.
I think we know. I think there's things that we can obviously know based on his resume, Vince. And number one is, what's one of his biggest weaknesses? He's never been a head coach before. That's a weakness. I mean, it is, because until you've done something, it's that old expression. You don't know what you don't know till you find out you don't know it, right?
Sure.
That's just the reality. No matter how many lessons you learn from Jim Tressel and Luke Fickell and Brian Kelly and all those kind of things, until you've walked in those shoes, it's a different animal, okay? And so that lack of experience is hurting him. And I don't think any of the hires he's made so far help him with that. I don't think any of them address that per se, other than they've coached with other good coaches too. And it's the thought of, I'm going to put the best possible coaching staff together that I can, knowing that we can work through some of those things together because we've got 10 great assistants kind of thing. I think the other thing that about this is, obviously as a defensive coordinator his whole life, he's never really worked with the offense before. And so it's important that I think the fact that you bring in a Harry Heastan helps because that's a veteran guy.
Right.
But I personally would like to see more of a veteran running backs coach who's a dynamic recruiter. Someone who's got a little bit of experience. But running back coaches, for the most part, tend to be a little on the younger side because a lot of guys, when they can leave running backs, they do because there's just not a lot of opportunities for promotion as just a pure running backs coach. Sure. Coach Alfred has had to experience that in his career, like getting passed over for his alma mater's head coaching job so they can hire freaking Steve Adazio, who, raise your hand if you predicted that dumpster fire, right? And everyone in the chat, all 900 and almost 1,000 people should be raising their hand right now saying they saw that dumpster fire coming. But, the reality is a lot of these people making decisions are not football people. They're not sports people. They look at resumes and they look at reputation. And that's why you see a lot of these schools make bad hires because they don't have enough football people involved in these decisions. And it's the same thing in the NFL. Like the owners that surround themselves with football people usually tend to be the successful owners, right? The owners who are business people, Daniel Snyder, right? The Bears people, right? That don't surround themselves with enough good football people tend to be losers more often than not, right? Because they make bad hires. Ooh, this guy's considered good. I'm going to go hire one of his disciples, even though the guy can't coach his way out of a wet paper bag. Right. Adam Gage. Gase, excuse me. So yeah. So I mean, those are things you look at and just kind of say, hey, look, that's why you need to surround yourself with talented people. And I like having some veterans. So that's just my
I like 2 cents on that. I like having a veteran as a head coach, as a sounding board, just somebody who's been there, who's experienced things I haven't experienced, so that we can talk. I mean, I like having somebody to talk to. That's me personally, and I would assume that a lot of people are like that in the coaching world. You don't just make decisions, in a box. You know what I mean? Right. Like, I like to talk things out with people, and I find out stuff that I don't know all the time, and I like that personally.
Yep. Demetrius Rex with a super chat. Thank you, Demetrius.
Any intel on Dante Moore? A week or so ago, you said that if things don't pick up soon, a month or so, that they may push harder for other prospects.
Right.
Well, that was like 2 days ago.
Right. It was this past week, and we're still within the month, so don't have to hurry. Right. They did go out and see him. Tommy Reese went and saw him on Friday. I haven't heard anything back from as far as how it went, but yes, they're still pushing. Coach Freeman starting to get more involved in that one as well. So we're not in that time yet where we got to worry about that. So no new intel on Dante Moore other than just Notre Dame continues to push. Notre Dame is one of his top 3 schools, and there's still a lot of work to be done. It's about the only thing that I can say on that one.
Who's your 60? Would it be normal to hire defensive line coach before the D coordinator?
It's not normal to do that, but when you have a head coach who's a defensive guy and he knows what he wants, he's going to hire what he wants. And that's the whole point of this. And I'm actually I'm kind of okay with this because I personally would like to see Marcus Freeman hire a linebacker coach and for him to call the defense. Like make Mike Mickens the pass game coordinator or something, and you've got Al Washington as the run game coordinator, and you hire a good linebackers coach, and then you call the defense. You can have your coordinators put it together, but you're still involved in defense. You're still in calling plays on defense. Yeah. That's just my personal opinion because I think he's one of the better defensive minds in the game of football. Well, he's still going to have his hand on the defense, and he knows what he wants at certain positions, and he wants to find a defensive coordinator that's going to fit what he's already doing and what he wants, which is why he didn't budge with John Haycock. I mean, he didn't budge at all, and good on you for that because you have a philosophy of what you're doing. And this is coming from someone who, for Brian Kelly's first 3-4 years at Notre Dame, supported the notion that Brian Kelly still called plays. Because I am okay with that happening as long as the coach is still involved in the day-to-day. The reason that I went away from supporting Brian Kelly doing that is because Brian Kelly stopped being involved in the day-to-day. He stopped being involved in the day-to-day, and he stopped really studying the game outside of what he was doing. And that to me is when you've got to give it up, because you've got to see the trends and you've got to do, you got to be on top of it. And as long as Marcus Freeman is doing that, I would support that. So that means I'm more, and we have another question about this too, Vince, from Eric Fasano, but I'm more okay with it in this instance than I normally would be, because it tells me that he's still very much going to be involved in the type of defense that he wants to run. And I've been told that he's told the players there won't be a lot of changes on defense, which is one of the things that kept Foskey and Adam Yule and those guys coming back, is they're not going to have to learn a brand new defense next year.
For one year.
The defensive coordinator is going to have to adapt to what Marcus Freeman wants, as opposed to vice versa. And because here's the thing, Vince, and at the end of the day, Marcus Freeman doesn't have to hire a defensive coordinator. I mean, that's the trump card he has in his back pocket. Hey, if you don't want to come, that's fine. If push comes to shove, I'll run the defense, which I almost kind of – is it bad that I'm rooting on guys to turn him down for the coordinator job?
So that he has more responsibility?
Yeah, so he has to take over. I know that's probably wrong, but that's just kind of – even if it's just for a couple of years, just to really get established what you want, that's something that I would like to see. Because, I mean, look, like I said, Al Washington just turned down D coordinator jobs to a year ago to Tennessee. An SEC school – he turned down. So you run it for a couple of years, and then maybe him and Mike Mickens can be co-coordinators in a couple of years or something like that. Like, I'm not – I mean, that's going to be harder to happen if you actually go out and hire a defensive coordinator, unless you're thinking, I'm going to get this guy to come in for a couple of years. He's going to do what I like and do what I want because I know him, I respect him, we work well together. But this guy's going to be like me in a couple of years, and he's going to go get a head coaching job. Then I could do that. That may be the rationale too, but you're going to do it the way he wants to do it, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because I like the way that he does it, and I think he's still involved in the game or not. I do want to address this one. Timeout, Tom. Sorry if this has been asked, but do you think the coaches left on their accord, or are they being gently pushed out? Del Alexander, Jeff Quinn, and Brian Polian were not going to be able to come back if they wanted to.
It wasn't gently.
Lance Taylor and Mike Elson were not pushed out. And it wasn't gentle. It wasn't. It wasn't. It's like that scene of like, hey guys, so you're shutting the door slowly in their face, like, yeah, I'm trying to be nice about this, but you got to go. Sorry, it wasn't gentle.
Right.
Lance Taylor would be back next year if he didn't get a better job. Mike Elson would be back next year if he didn't get a better job. They were not nudged out.
And better job to him.
Correct. Now, do I think that in some ways Coach Freeman is excited about maybe some of these guys leaving? Not that in any way is it that he didn't like them or didn't want to coach with them, but I think anytime you're a head coach and you get to put more and more of your stamp on a program, I think you want to embrace that.
Yeah.
It's hard to do at a place like Notre Dame because you did have so much success. So I think it's more of just, it's a bigger picture excitement as opposed to a Mike Elson or Lance Taylor
individual
excitement.
Guy actually leaving. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Because what I've been told is that Mike Elson and Marcus Freeman got along very well. So I don't think there was any nudging, but it also doesn't mean that I'm going to beg you to stay either.
Right.
I think there's a difference there.
I agree.
So that whole situation is a little bit interesting too, because there is that stuff coming out, and I think that's always hindsight. Somebody trying to tell somebody because somebody wants to be noticed or be known as a source or whatever. That is something I have never heard about until after the fact. And normally when you don't hear about something till after the fact, it's not true. It's spin from somebody.
Right.
And so no, I don't think he was forced out.
From Brent, the fact that we are beating SEC teams routinely for coaches says that all this was not the case for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I get what you're saying, Brent. I mean, I don't know if I would say per se that they beat out an SEC team, because I don't think it ever got to that point. And that was Coach Freeman's whole thing was, we've got to go do what we got to do to get him here before this becomes a bidding war with somebody else.
Right.
And I think that was what he did with Al Washington was that. I keep saying, keep wanting to say Marcus Washington for some reason. with Al Washington is
well, we've been dealing with a Jamarcus.
Yeah,
we dealt with a Marcus. I mean, there's a lot of it.
You want to make sure none of those have anything to do with Al. I don't know whatever. But anyway, thanks for the attempt to spin it in my favor, Vince.
Just trying to help you
and
out.
not just saying it's because you're an idiot, and I appreciate that very much, Vince. But Brent, it never. I just want to be honest. It never got to the point where they beat out Georgia per se. It wasn't like he had an offer to be the D-line coach of Georgia and an offer to be the D-line coach of Notre Dame, and he chose Notre Dame. Notre Dame. This is actually smarter and better. Is that you were able to convince him to come here before it even got to that point, which I think is important because you don't necessarily want to get in a bunch of. How do I say this? You don't want to get into a bunch of bidding wars with SEC schools.
No, that's true. That is even though Notre Dame is offering more money these days, it's still not a great place to be. I mean, I agree with that completely. Agree with that one.
Yep. Okay, here we go.
Hunter Davis, do you know if Marcus is looking at Tony Alford for running back coach?
I would be shocked if they didn't at least kick the tires on that one.
Sure.
I mean, that's about all I can say on that one, but I would expect them to kick the tires on that one and other coaches as well. I mean, there's some
pick up the phone. Yeah.
There's some big name coaches whose names I have heard kind of floated around about that one. Here's an interesting one. And Vince, we got to get out of here in about the next 15 minutes. So let's work through as many of these questions as we can.
You got it.
So we can get out of here. My voice is starting to go.
I can tell.
Yeah.
Conley Ellis has an easy one here.
It's a good one.
Can you? I completely agree because I didn't know the answer to this a while back. Brian, can you explain 247 and 247 composite rankings?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Yeah, so the 247 rankings for them is just the people that work there putting their rankings together. Mm-hmm. Their top 247, because they do it, their top 247 players is all that they rank. The composite ranking takes in all the services combined. It's 247, I believe ESPN, Rivals, and they're all kind of working on three because on three also is coming up with their own a deal, and it's their kind of consensus, I think is what they call it or something like that. But it's the same as because what Shannon Terry did is he got a bunch of investors to now go start on three. He's the guy that started Rivals, then he sold that, then he started 247, then he sold that. He's going to start on three. He's going to sell that. It's just kind of like a new improved version of 247.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like same ranking system, same names of different things. It just, whatever. It is what it is. But it's the composite takes all those rankings together and has some sort of point system that gives certain, if you fall, if you're number 10 on this one and you're number 50 on this one, and then number 500 on another one, then you're not going to be a top 50 recruit, or you're at least a top 10 recruit. And then sometimes a guy will rank higher on the composite than he does on any individual one because he's ranked like 70 to 90 on all the services, but he ends up ranking 62 on the composite because there's no range for him. Whereas other guys that may rank higher are way lower on another one, if that makes sense. And so that's why a lot of people like to look at that one, Conley, is because it takes all the services and puts them into one ranking. One point system for one ranking, as opposed to, ESPN has this guy really high, but so it kind of takes that into consideration and looks at it that way. So that's a very good question because I know you're not alone in not being sure what that is. I've been asked that question a lot of times, and honestly, I had to ask that at first. I'm like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
You guys have two rankings?
Yeah,
that didn't make any sense.
All right,
and then you find out what it means, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I actually kind of like the idea of it. I really do. And some people will only look at the composite ranking. They don't care what one service ranks a guy. They want to know what the composite is, which I think is too narrow-minded because sometimes, a guy may be a top 100 recruit by three services, but one has him number 600, right? And it's not going to give you a very fit, right? Exactly. Yeah. So, or a guy, right? Only one service ranks, like Nicholas Anderson, I think, from that signed with Oklahoma. He was like ranked in the top 100 by ESPN, but nobody else even had as a 4-star for much of the time. Well, he ends up grading out much higher on the composite because of that one that's really high, when in reality you're like, yeah, but I don't know if he was that good of a recruit. So it kind of goes out that way. That's kind of my thoughts.
Jeffrey, thank you very much for the super chat. Might have been addressed, but you mentioned with the defensive line coach, we had an opportunity to upgrade, even though we all love Mike at that position. What is your opinion on if we upgraded or if it's just a 1-for-1?
So Jeffrey, my answer is I can't tell you that I think it's an upgrade or not, because I just don't know enough about Al Washington as a D-line coach to give you that answer. I'm just being honest as possible. I can't tell you it's an upgrade or it's a downgrade. I don't know nearly as much about Al Washington as I know about Mike Elston, right? So it's really unfair for me to say yes, it's an upgrade, or no, it's not. I mean, you could probably say, well, you should have said the same thing about receiver, but it's easier for me to say when that guy stinks that I know this guy's better, right? I mean, even his 1 year is better than what that guy had been doing for 5 years, right? But in this instance, I think Mike Elston's one of the 10 to 12 best defensive line coaches in college football. I can't tell you that Al Washington is that. What I can tell you is people that I know and respect who know him a lot better than I do think this is going to be an immediate upgrade for the most part. They feel that way.
We'll see.
And so again, I'm also not the kind of person that's going to adopt somebody else's point of view just because I know them and respect them. I'm going to come to my own opinions on that.
And it's tough because I really like Mike Elston.
Right. But I'm excited about this hire. I think this is a very good hire.
Yeah.
Would I have fired Mike Elston to go hire Al Washington? No, probably not. Because I don't know enough about Al Washington.
Right.
But am I, of what I know and what people that I trust and what they tell me, am I excited that this is the hire now that Mike Elston's gone? Yeah, I am. And I'm looking forward to seeing if he's going to be good or not, or how good he's going to be. But some people are just great fits at a certain school. And I think Al Washington, with his background, he's coached at a private Catholic-ish school before, Jesuit at Boston College. He played at one. Yeah. He understands what it's like to go to a religious school with somewhat good academic standards, even though BC doesn't have Notre Dame standards. Now, he's also coached at some big-time programs, so he understands the magnitude and the pressure of winning. Sure. In a place like, how many schools go 11-2 and finish like 6th or 7th in the final rankings and overhaul their staff like Ohio State just did?
Right.
That's called very high standards. So that's the pressure of being at Notre Dame is not going to be a problem for Al Washington because he was at Michigan and Ohio State the last 4 years. So I think that part I like as well. So he's recruited against Alabama and Georgia and Clemson and Michigan and Notre Dame and schools like that. And so that part of it I like a lot as well.
Let MGR
manager. No, he says it right down there in the chat. Let manager one.
There you go.
So there we go. I love it. Because we asked him about this in the Friday show.
Oh, okay.
What does this mean?
Gotcha.
I think it was after you had left.
Gotcha.
Because I kept saying LET MGR because I didn't want to be that idiot that says this, but it really means that. And but yes, thank you.
He gave a thumbs up there too. So over 1,000 watching live, which
including
is great.
Our friend Let Manager, who is from Canada, clearly.
Yeah.
As you can tell by the.
Absolutely. Or he just likes dealing in Canadian money. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Blaine Tiller says, just a footnote, but I love all of Ryan's new threads on the board on recruiting. Yes, well, there's a lot more recruiting action going on our board as well. Mike Huff, Marcus seems to be valuing NFL experience of some kind. You guys think he's waiting on NFL guys? I think that's part of why he's not rushing to make a move on a defensive coach, because there's some coaches I'm sure he'd like to speak with that right now are still playing.
Right.
And as they aren't playing anymore, you may see some calls made. And he may say, the guy over here that I liked in college, I like better, but I wasn't going to make that move until I got a chance to talk to this guy. So it doesn't mean he's going to go that route, but I think there's some coaches he's interested in speaking with before he makes that move. Here's another one, Vince. Here you go.
Yeah, Ryan O'Connor. I was thinking you guys both mentioned how key it was that Freeman and Notre Dame kept Elston and Taylor. Both are gone now. If that happened on day one of the Freeman hire, would your outlook be different? It would be for me. And I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
It would be for me because that means that they were leaving because of the head coaching change.
Right.
Now we know that's not the case with why they left now.
So I also would have been nervous about signing day, to be honest with you.
Oh, good point.
That would have been a big thing for me. I don't know if you would have been able to sign Tyson Ford and Aiden Gobira.
Yeah.
Maybe you would have. I don't know if you would have. I don't know if Jadarian Price necessarily. I mean, again, I don't know. I don't know how these guys would have handled it. Maybe maybe a guy transfers. If this Nelson would have happened right after the season, he'd have had all off, the whole winter to say, hey, I'm going to, follow Coach Elston somewhere. Maybe, I don't know. So yeah, it would have seemed like guys didn't want to stay on board with him. And that obviously wasn't the case. So yeah, it's Air Pro K asks, why is it that players like Vernon and Bowen were both 5 stars when they committed, then both dropped in the rankings? I'm so sick of it. Air Pro, my guy, maybe it's not my guy, maybe it's the lady on the our left of the avatar, but Air Pro, that's something that you get used to after a while. And you just kind of expect it. I mean, you just kind of expect it. I don't really care, to be honest with you. Like, it's kind of like we've seen this in the past where a kid, Prince Collie, is, I watched the film like, man, this kid's really good. Then all of a sudden his ranking goes up, and all of a sudden the perception is he's a better player than he was. Like, no, he was always that player. It's just now his ranking went up, so you think he's better. He's not better. Or in the same case of, guy commits and his ranking goes down. Well, he didn't get any worse as a player. It just, he was no longer a story because he committed Notre Dame. They're going to hype up the guys that are uncommitted or may flip or have some sort of natural interest. And Brennan Vernon from Mentor, Ohio is not a needle-moving interest story. So why continue to hype him up? Keon Keeley is, because other big schools are still recruiting him.
Sure.
And he's from Florida and all that other kind of stuff. So, that's yeah.
Rob says, Brian and Vince, I know we need to move on from even mentioning Coach Kelly, but can you see him poaching these new assistants out of spite if they have great success in the next 1 or 2 years at Notre Dame?
I'm sure he would try. It's not going to happen. If the people that knew him didn't follow him there, he's not poaching assistants from Notre Dame that Notre Dame wants to keep.
Right.
And look, people in coaching know Brian Kelly. They know what it's like to work for Brian Kelly. Marcus Freeman's going to develop a very quick reputation as a guy you want to work with and work for. I'm not worried about that. But Rob, I do think your head's in the right place, because I do think that is something that Brian Kelly will try to do. I'm confident in saying Brian Kelly has tried to poach assistants and current players from this current roster. And so far it hasn't worked. Of guys that Marcus Freeman wanted, the only coaches he's poached were guys who were either an analyst, Kerry Cook's getting a promotion from analyst to full-time coach, which makes sense. Jake Flint going from assistant strength coach to full-time strength coach. Those are all promotions. And the other one was Brian Polian, who was not going to be brought back. So Brian Polian wasn't going to have a job for Marcus Freeman. I can assure you of that, which is why he left when he did. Look, there's a reason some of these guys left when they did. Now, not all the guys that were let go immediately left. I learned a lot more respect for Jeff Quinn than I already. I mean, as a person, I always respected Jeff Quinn. I just think he's a very good offensive line coach. But for him to stay through the bowl game and work with those kids, knowing he was fired before any of the practices started, I think says a lot. It backed up what you and I felt about Jeff Quinn, which is he's not a very good offensive line coach, but he's a really good dude, and he cares about his kids. Yeah. The Fish, why do people assume Laurinaitis is a good linebacker coach? I don't know who's assuming that.
Yeah.
And he's not their linebackers coach.
No, he's never coached. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
And we had 2 people ask this, let manager, and then earlier we had someone else ask about this. I have not yet. The only film I've been able to get is Baylor defensive film, which isn't going to help me at all. What I have been able to do is watch some TV copy film. And it kind of just confirms 2 things that we already saw. Because really, when you're talking about evaluating receivers, you can really only tell on certain plays when they show it from afar, and you can tell the line of scrimmage and how they catch the ball. I'll say this, what we talked about the other day, they do a really good job of fighting for the football. They attack the football. They use their hands to catch. They're not body catchers. They show really good timing as jumpers, which tells me they work on that. Because they all do it. They're all really good at timing and back shoulders and body control, which tells me they practiced that stuff last year. And they're good at getting off press. They do a pretty decent job of getting off press, especially the outside guys. The slot guy that came from Dartmouth, at times he could get jammed up. That's because he's an Ivy League caliber player, not a Big 12 caliber player. But he had 30 catches for over 300 yards this year. Yeah. And he was still decent at it. It's just at times the better guys could get on him a little bit. That sounded way harsher on him than I meant it to be. Like he's some bum that didn't. That's not what I meant. I'm saying there's a reason he was at Dartmouth for 4 years.
Right.
That's what I meant. He's not Golden Tate is kind of what I'm saying. meaning he's got to be real sound. And at times, some of the better guys could get a jam on him. And I apologize that sounded way harsher than I meant it to sound. Was not trying to take a shot at the kid. The other guys like R.J. Sneed and Tyquan Thornton, they were much better at using their hands and their feet to fight at the line of scrimmage. And then, and like, there's one particular play, I'll use the kid from Dartmouth, where he beat a guy at Oklahoma State, and the guy was covered him. I mean, guy was right on him, but he stacked him. So we've always said, get by a guy and stack him. A stacking him means, so if this is the receiver and this is the defensive line, the back, and I get side of you and I get ahead of you, and I stay like this, you can still play me because you still have that inside angle. What you teach a receiver is the second you get a step on that guy, you stack him. Because once you stack him, he's now behind you, can't get past you, right? And so a well-placed ball anywhere over here, he's going to have a hard time defending. Whereas if he's still here, he can kind of play that ball. He can get in on you and get on your hip. And as soon as the guy can get inside of your hip, he can use his forearm to ride you, and there's nothing you can do about it because you didn't stack him, right? Whereas if he's behind you, one thing I would teach is my guys run is you'd run with a club where that guy was, right, to keep him off of you, and then you go to the ball. You can't do that when a guy's on you because you're just kind of like this. You're just like, kind of hip to hip, shoulder to shoulder. And they do a really good – he stacked the guy from Oklahoma State, and the quarterback put the sucker right over the top and just dimed it, and he was it. But there's nothing the DB could do because he stacked him at the line. And that was a really good route. They do a really good job of that. So the beginning and the end of things I liked. I can't talk a lot about the top ends and their out cuts and things like that because there's just not a lot of that on the TV copy. So I am still waiting on that. But I did at least get enough to where I could kind of feel like so far what I've seen, they were pretty good. And I did go back and I do have some all-22 film of the 2020 Baylor team. And the reason I watched that is because I want to see, okay, were these guys already doing that last year? They were not good at getting off the press last year. They were not good at contested catches nearly as good last year. They got better this year under Chancey Stuckey at those two things that I can evaluate up to this point in time. So, and Vince obviously wasn't able to watch any film because he was at the baseball conference all weekend. So, yeah. All righty. So we the Fish says plenty of people have wished he was a coach rather than an analyst, including in this thread. My question is why so premature? I get your hesitation, Fish, but I also get people's excitement. I mean, look, Brian Hartline is now going to be considered. That's how it's always going to be when you hire an NFL guy with no experience. That's not correct, but I would say Brian Hartline is more the exception, not the rule. But when a guy has that kind of success, that's what people are going to think. They see a guy that was an elite college player, a really good NFL player for a number of years, that people are looking and say, well, of course he can teach it. He played it at a high level. So I understand it. I just would like to see him be around the game for a while. I mean, even Brian Hartline was a GA for a year before he fully became the, receivers coach. So we did have this question, Vince. Will Al Washington also coach linebackers? No, he's going to be the defensive line. He's going to be the defensive line coach.
Right. Yep.
So I think, Vince, I'm kind of going through here now. I think we've got all the questions, I believe. Let me see down here. We got Jeffrey's question about that. Just trying to see if we've got any more that I wanted to get to.
I do want to address this one right here. Oh,
sorry.
No, you're good.
I just thought this was funny. Point was only good for recruiting Hawaii for Michael Krause.
There's a lot of free vacations for him. So, I mean,
what was the one you wanted to pull up, Vince? Sorry about that.
David seems to have an issue with us being blurry. It's not blurry on our end, so my guess is it's probably
David just complains all the time, Vince. That's why I haven't been pulling his questions.
I didn't realize that. Okay, well, I want everybody to be happy. I'm a people pleaser, but I don't believe that's an issue on our end.
Yeah. So. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, that's why I kind of ignored it.
Okay, fair enough.
Here we go. Joseph Sergi is Houston's Belks the favorite for DC. Higher herd talks are progressing rapidly. There's a lot of things that have been said out there that aren't accurate.
That's a good.
I do think he is a candidate. I do think that he's a guy that Marcus Freeman likes as a candidate. I don't expect anything to be done today. I think there's going to be some phone calls made today, depending on how some different things are going, who wins and who loses. But do I think Doug Belk is a legitimate candidate? Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Do I think talks are progressing rapidly? No, because I think there's other candidates in the conversation. So you can't be negotiating a contract with one guy to be your D coordinator when you haven't decided that he's going to be your defensive coordinator.
Right.
And as of this afternoon, talking to sources very close to the situation, they have not decided on who their D coordinator is going to be. So you can't.
And they have not offered the job to anybody up to this point.
Now that doesn't mean
Haycock was offered the job, and I don't believe
he was. Well, not. It wasn't even. It never even got the money because it was about bringing your staff. The situation with a guy like Doug Belk, for example, and here's what people need to understand how this works. If there's 3 or 4 guys you like, you start having money conversations with all of them, because you got to know, like, you can't say no to your 2, 3, and 4, then start negotiating with number 1, because if that's when you find out number 1 wants $1.5 million and you're only willing to pay $1 million and he's not going to budge. Oh, well, gee, now I got to go call number 2, 3, and 4 who didn't want who we told they weren't going to get the job.
Right.
You start getting an idea of what people want before you make your final offer, unless it's someone you know who you know is going to take the job, right? So you always have those negotiations with top candidates, but it doesn't mean you've settled on it. Just because they start having money talks with guys doesn't mean they've settled. It's like, hey, I like 4 guys. Let's find out what they want. I think they're all the same coach. And if I think they can all do an equal job, one guy wants $500,000, another guy wants $750,000, the next 2 guys want $1 million, I'm hiring a guy that costs $500,000. You know what I mean? So I think that's the key. So that's kind of how that works. And then just 2 more things, Vince, before we go. Corey D just got here. I was reading comments from Ohio State fans about Al Washington as a coach, and the prevailing sentiment is Al is mediocre's best. Thoughts? My thoughts are, Corey, go watch the rest of the show, right? Yeah. Rewatch the show. I don't care what fans think, Ohio State fans think about anything, okay? I'm just going to be honest with you. So if you want to hear what we said, we spent a lot of time on it. I would encourage you to read it. I would also remind you that Ohio State fans or Tennessee fans didn't think Harry Hiestand was a loss either. So there you go. And then the last one, we did have this from Conley Ellis. Love the Indy Stadium flag, Brian. Where do I get one? So this I got is a fat head that my sister bought me. So you can buy it from wherever you can buy fat heads. This flag, however, which is not part of this, is something you can find at the Irish Breakdown merch store.
Yes,
so you can find that on the store along with a lot of other things about that. So yes, so you can definitely, if you want one of these, people have bought these. We have had people that have bought these because they are in the merch store. So Vince, that's going to be it. Why don't you take us out of here, my man?
Hey, thanks for everybody for joining us for the special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell.
Whichever one you're supposed to smash, smash it.
Smash them all, baby, because the notification bell is important, because we weren't planning to have a show today, but we ended up having one, and you get your notification if you have one. And then also the boards. Get on the boards, everybody. Boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's where all the intel is, and generally you'll know what we're going to talk about on the show before we get to the show. So make sure you hit up the boards. And if you're listening to us on a podcast, give us a 5-star review, and also make sure you subscribe over there. Did I miss anything, Brian? I don't. That is fantastic. That is fantastic. I love that.
I love this. This is great. We were going to be out of here, but I'm sorry. Sid Irish says, I don't trust a Buckeye to sit the right way on a toilet seat. I'm sorry. That is too good. Having grown up in Ohio, truth, preach, amen, love it, all of it. So anyway, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Great way to end the show, Sid. And also great comment by D-Rock, reserving judgment on coaching decisions until the season begins, then we'll roll with it. I definitely understand. So, all right, y'all, everybody have a great day. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.